a little something about spiritualism. And I've shared this with you once before, but I feel it's more appropriate this time. And this comes from Peebles' What is Spiritualism? Who are these spiritualists, and what has spiritualism done for the world? And he published this in 1903. And it's just a small line. Spiritualism teaches salvation by character, or by the life. And the impression I get with this is that character is something that we develop over time. We're not born with good character. We're born with smiles, giggles, and a need to be fed. Just ask any mother. But over the course of our life, we develop character. And part of developing that character is making some serious mistakes. Whether those mistakes are seen as serious by others or by ourselves. We make some serious mistakes. And sometimes we regret those mistakes. And it's that regret of those mistakes that may add character to who we are, because we have purpose. We want to do something that will maybe alleviate that mistake, or how we feel about it, the guilt we may feel about it, because that's what regret is. If we feel regret, we may feel guilty about something, whether it's not spending time with a loved one or something we foolishly did. I know I've done several of them on my own and with others. But that's life. And spiritualism is about life. And spirituality is about the experience we have during that life. Would anyone like to comment?
I would just say there just seems to be a heck of a lot of just truth in those words for me.
Good. And I would like to thank you for allowing me to share this with you. Well, I don't know if it would be today's lesson or today's talk. I'm going to do something I don't care to do a whole lot. I'm going to preach a little bit, or I'm going to run off at the mouth. I awoke this morning with these thoughts and ideas in my head. And I know it's no different than many of you. And it came to me, someone called me, and she called me yesterday with some questions. And then when we hung up, she said, "Happy Palm Sunday." Well, I never thought anything about it. And then I woke up this morning with this inspiration. And it's about Jesus and his journey to riding into the village or the town. I forget the name. I didn't write it down when I was looking at things. And it made me think about the palms and the colt that he rode in on. And then it went even further than that. I'm going to draw a little bit from a translation of Flavius Josephus' book on the history of the Jews, and in it he describes Jesus. But it's not the Jesus that we are familiar with. The Jesus that we are familiar with, he refers to as a wise man, a wise person who was able to do things by thought and by voice. I assume he's referring to the healing and to the prophecies that he did, the teachings and that. Much of it is not included in the Bible. But Flavius lived during that time. And in the Independent Spiritualist Association's basic book, there's just a couple of paragraphs or something that has Jesus being recorded as a rabble-rouser. Well, Flavius records Jesus, and I don't know if it's the same one or not, but he records Jesus as being a captain of a group of people. He called them thieves, which fulfills the term rabble-rouser and such, because this was during the Jewish war. And this Jesus was deceitful, underhanded, not someone to be trusted. And he felt that he represented the Jewish people. Now, when we read about Jesus in the Gospels, we don't have any history. We have a lot of history that has been received through inspiration and trance. And I'm sure you've all come to know me that some of that I question, even more so. But we really don't have any real history about Jesus. So I've got this inspiration that I wake up with, and I'm beginning to wonder, because if Flavius was alive and knew Jesus, probably met the man, then the likelihood of Jesus being part of this, what he calls the Jewish war, may be very good. And when we look at his teachings and everything, this would add a lot of support for that. Because as I said earlier about spiritualism being about character, salvation through character, and there is bits and pieces in these Gospels that might even suggest that somewhere, Jesus may actually have been this captain, and he stopped for whatever reason, and he began to reflect upon his life like so many of us do. I do all the time. It's the only way I can determine if I'm doing any better than I did before. And when I compare what I'm doing now with what I was like 15 years ago, there's a huge difference there. So I can only assume that Jesus may have done the same thing. He looked back and he saw this. And he may have become disturbed by this potential past. Now, I'm not saying that this was his past. I'm not saying that at all. I'm offering you something to contemplate, to consider, because many of us spend time or have been taught that Jesus is essentially deified. And because of that deification, we see him above us. And we are below us, and we always see that. But very few of us could interpret Jesus as being someone very similar to ourselves. There's a passage in one of the Gospels where Peter is asking Jesus a question. And if you read the passage, it tells us that when Peter asked this question of Jesus, Jesus did not look at Peter and respond to his question. Jesus looked beyond Peter to the gathered disciples. He didn't answer Peter's question. All he said was, famous words, "Get thee behind me, Satan." Didn't answer the question. I don't recall what the question was, but it didn't answer the question that Peter was asking. When I read this, the first time I didn't pay any attention, but when I read it the second time, what came to mind was Jesus. I imagine myself as being Jesus, and I imagine someone asking me this pertinent question. And the only thing I can do is look behind him at all these expectant faces and say to myself, oh crap, I don't have an answer. So I deflect. I always feel it's important to recognize flaws in people, not to take them apart, but to see what they did with it, to see what they did with this flaw. And when we read more about Jesus, he was always about the Jews. They were his people. He taught the Jewish religion. And what they call the Gentiles still came to him. And Jesus didn't just say, okay, I'll do that. No. Jesus tested them. He didn't test them about their faith or anything, because they couldn't be part of the Jewish faith. They were Gentiles, and that's just a no-no. But he tested their resolve. And that impressed me, because he didn't just stick with his own people. It was as though, okay, you get it. So I'll do something. I'll do this for you. The centurion came to him, and he was impressed, because the centurion said, no, you don't have to go there. Just say the word and it will happen. This stuff didn't happen with his own people. This didn't happen with the Jewish people that he had been teaching and everything. It didn't happen with them. But somebody completely removed from everything. And he was impressed with this. I would have been impressed by this if I were him. I'm still impressed when it happens to me today. It's like, oh, wow, you think this much of me. Of course, I don't say it like that. I think it. And I feel good about myself. This was long before I moved into Niles. At least I think it was. I could be wrong. But I'd pulled into a gas station. I was putting gas in my vehicle, and this woman came up to me and said, "It's nice to see you again, Reverend Philip." I don't even think I was ordained. No, I wasn't ordained at that time. And she thanked me so much, because she said that you helped me change my life. And I was teaching at the Spiritual Development Chapel in Benton Harbor. I couldn't place this woman at all, but she thanked me for whatever I had said, whatever I had done. And this was the same with that centurion, with Jesus. Another instance, a woman asked, I believe, for healing as well, and Jesus tested her. And I forget what he said to her, but her response was that even the dogs feed from the scraps of the table. And he looked at her, amazed, and complied. For me, this just provides potential evidence that this captain that Flavius was talking about could very well have been the Jesus that we later came to know, because all he says about that Jesus is that he was a wise man who had many followers, 70 disciples. Think about that. 70 disciples. And then, of course, there was the 12. So I can see this. And this might even explain why he's riding this colt into this city, and they're throwing their cloaks before it, the palms. Now, the palm leaves have significance, because in some of the ceremonies of these secret schools or mystery schools, once the initiate goes through this simulated death, and their reward, one of their rewards is being presented with a laurel of white palms, the leaves representing the rays of the sun, representing the glory, the light, this halo that's around us. And typically this is seen with one who is wise. So they say he victoriously went into this town, but they don't say anything about why he victoriously went into this town. We're just told that his ministry preceded him and he was rewarded with that. But I begin to wonder if these people were celebrating because he was this captain, or he may have been this captain who fought during the Jewish war. It's all something for you to contemplate. It's not saying that this is it or anything like that, but something to consider, something to allow you to relate to Jesus. So now I will be quiet, get off my soapbox. And I don't know if there's anything worth discussing, but there might be something that you might like to comment on.
I would agree that I find it more compelling to see Jesus born a man rather than the only begotten Son of God. We're all sons and daughters of God. And in that way, he is the Son of God, but born of a human mother and father. And through the journey of his life, became Christed, which was the elevated spiritual position that he was able to attain. And seeing him in all of his humanness, to me, is both a more compelling order to follow in his footsteps, and also means that it's possible. So therefore, I can't have him on a pedestal as being the only Son of God, and how can we possibly do, and we mere humans, what he does? And that seeing him as human, um, making mistakes, growing, learning from them, is more realistic to me than the him, walking on water basically his entire life. That to me that view takes all of the excuses away for not trying to do it, not trying to follow his message in his footsteps. And you presented another view of that, and I thank you for doing that. So
I think this was wonderful food for thought. Um, I don't I I don't think we tend to reflect upon his humanness perhaps as much as we should. Um, Remember, I mean, the Bible leaves out many years of his life that we don't know anything about, and I have to wonder sometimes if that was intentional, um, because they wanted to focus on his last few years as opposed to everything he went through to get there. And I'm sure he did go through a lot in his humanness because he was a human being and he was living this earthly life. And it had to be very difficult for him at times, I'm sure, like anyone follow, on their path. So I think that's very true. And I cannot quote this specifically, but I will paraphrase. But I believe near the end of his life, he did question God whether he wanted this or not. And he didn't, he said, take it away from me. I can't deal with it. And then he did. But this cloak or, this journey that he had to be on. So I'm sure he had a lot of questions and concerns about whether he was doing the right thing over those years and learning and growing. I have heard about this, but I've heard that there are books that pertain to his life, his earlier life, that aren't in the Bible. I haven't actually read any of them, but it would be an interesting thing to look to read, I imagine. But I do understand and his humanness. I do, and I don't know. Sometimes I feel like we, as a culture or a society or an organized religion, tend to focus on the man more than the principles. And I'm not saying you shouldn't focus on his divinity, but sometimes I think by doing that, you don't focus on what his message was, what he was teaching. So sometimes I think that can get in the way of his true message. But this was really good. This was really good food for thought, definitely. And I'm going on and on. I'll let Beth talk.
Well, what you're referring to, Sandy, is the prayer in the garden when he asks for this cup of wine.
Mm.
And here's something else that we don't know about, that is left to our speculation. I awoke with this inspiration, this voice in my head telling me this stuff. And I'm the type of person, I'm not going to believe everything you tell me. I'm going to investigate as much as I can. And I did. I just didn't go with what was given to me. I did. So I can only imagine that when Jesus was walking this plane, when he was teaching, going through some of these other trials, perhaps if he was this captain and sometime after this war had come to a close, and he's in prayer, perhaps he did hear this voice that caused him to question the actions that he may have done, because Flavius does not describe this particular Jesus very nicely. Underhanded, deceptive. And when I investigated even more, and I'm looking at, again, this garden where they come to arrest him, in one instance, there's the implication that they come with swords drawn and clubs. They're not going to go after a peaceful person with swords drawn and with clubs. It causes me to wonder about some of these things. And then, like I said, I wake up with this inspiration, with this voice, and I have to look. I have to share this. And Beth, you've been patiently awaiting me to close my mouth so you can get a word in edgewise. Proceed.
Oh, I don't have any words of wisdom.
They're all words of wisdom.
It's a different perspective. It keeps what's going through my head. So, was there a Jewish war?
According to Flavius, there was, because that's
Well,
what he writes about.
that's not good enough. He's a Roman. At least his name is Roman. But I could see from how a Roman perspective on a powerful Jewish leader who comes out of nowhere with nothing but his words and his talk, his actions. I've got fighting kitties over here. Would that perspective would be underhanded, because he's speaking words that even the Jewish people, he was bringing the New Testament, that totally foreign concept even to the Jews. So I could see where a Roman would say, yeah, that's underhanded, or this behavior is underhanded, without him actually being, a captain in an actual war. But his leadership, sure, the Romans were all military. Their whole way of life was military. How they lived, that organization, that discipline, that his perspective would say, yes, a captain, a rank of captain with that kind of power with the Jewish people. So that was just my perspective and his perspective of the other perspective. And we go on and on. I'm going to stop.
And I would like to thank all of you and Reverend Bacon for sharing your thoughts with us and allowing me to share mine with you. Thank you.